They are everywhere. On the streets, at the office, in the supermarket, and maybe even in your own home. But of course it's never you who's the narcissist. No, it's them. I mean, look at all these red flags. Look at all that toxicity. Run as fast as you can before the narcissist drains you of your energy. Step away from the toxic cycle orchestrated by this nasty vampire because they will mess up your life. You deserve better. Hello and welcome to this video. If you came here for a scary narcissist story, I'm gonna have to disappoint you. I'm not here to validate your irrational fear of an abstract concept, and I will surely not help you slap a label on someone you know. Let's introduce some nuance instead. Let's practice some differentiated thinking. Let's gently put our pitchforks and torches back into the cabinet and just relax for a second. Make sure to subscribe if you're into this type of stuff, and don't forget to click the like button unless you're a narcissist who doesn't care about that. In the second part of this video, we will imagine each MBTI type as a narcissist and what that would look like. If you have any thoughts on anything that I'm saying here, please leave a comment. It seems like the general public is obsessed with narcissism. There is an elaborate collective narrative around that topic, including really weird terms like narcissistic supply, which kinda indicates that a narcissistic person is some sort of spider or monster that needs to drink your blood. Like they're so much different from you, who probably also craves validation and attention. The narcissist is something like the modern-day villain. And Carl Jung, by the way, would probably say that we are collectively projecting our own narcissistic shadow onto that villain. That's why villains in stories actually exist. They're basically a surface for people's projections. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. These days it seems like we are very quick to call someone a narcissist. Your overly friendly neighbor is probably one. Your manager at work is most definitely one. Same goes for all politicians and celebrities. This banana is also secretly narcissistic. The media loves the topic as well because it gets a lot of attention, which of course translates into clicks, aka money. The general tone of all these articles and videos is almost always the same. The scary, scary narcissists are everywhere. Beware of these vampires. Click on this article to learn how to protect yourself and so on. Look, I'm not saying that there are no narcissists, and by no means is it okay to mistreat people the way real narcissists do. I'm just suggesting that we need to be more careful with our labels. The same goes for calling people toxic. Because applying a label on someone will likely lead to defensiveness and miscommunication. It won't give you a constructive foundation for dealing with their actions. So it's always better idea to address specific behaviors and situations rather than to paint the whole person in a certain color. Because in reality, people are more complex than what our collective storytelling suggests. And they're definitely more complex than your subjective judgment of them. In theory, whenever someone wants you to do something that's in their interests, it's potentially narcissistic. Everyone has their own interests. The question is only how people go about them. Imagine you get the wrong fries with your order. Would you get up and say something, or would you accept your fate? Meanwhile, someone else, possibly a narcissist, will get a new portion of fries because they have lied to the waitress that there was a hair in their fries. Approximately the same goes for pursuing people that you're interested in. Evolutionary, it all makes sense. If you don't represent your interests, someone else will represent theirs. It's called being assertive. So before we continue with this video, it's important to emphasize that, and I cannot stress this enough, narcissism is a spectrum. There is a big difference between someone asking for a raise at work and someone actively undermining their coworkers in order to advance in their career. Oh, and by the way, there's also a big difference between the disorder as diagnosed by a professional and casually calling someone a narcissist for any subjective reason. Here are the traits commonly associated with pathological narcissism. At first glance, they all seem pretty nasty, but each of them is again a spectrum. And actually, each of them deserves a separate video, but I don't think I have time for that, and for an MBTI-themed channel, this would probably go too far. Let's take a look at the keyword shallow relationships. What are they even? What does a shallow relationship look like? Because I really wasn't sure, I had to ask ChatGPT. 2 points seem especially interesting to me here, and it's the first and the last one. So on one hand, we have superficial interactions. These are not about any sort of depth or getting to know someone, they're more about how things appear. The very central concept here is that superficial interactions are transactional. It's all about what a narcissistic person can gain from another person, which practically means that they are using people as tools or objects. But don't forget that this is a spectrum. You don't have to get to know everyone in your life on a super deep level. Ain't nobody got time for that. So I think superficial interactions, for example, with your neighbors are okay as long as you're not harming them or taking too much from them. This last point here looks like a pretty sure sign that something is not right, and it's the high turnover of relationships. If you observe this about somebody, it might be a red flag. To some degree, it's normal that people in your life come and go, but if someone consistently has a high turnover in relationships, they're likely failing at establishing a true connection with anyone. Now, this is probably something a lot of people have. I bet you know such people as well. All parents make mistakes, and many of these mistakes will have an impact on their child's self-esteem. And then there is the concept of empathy, or lack thereof, and that is very central here. Because I'm such a big fan of definitions, here's a definition of empathy. So here's a question for you. When was the last time you have offered your bus seat to an elderly person? I mean, without expecting anything in return, like inheriting their fortune, of which they probably have none because they're using public transport. I guess a significant part of my audience are NF types, so maybe there's no need to explain empathy to you guys, but my point is that this elderly lady represents something. Imagine this elderly lady as the indicator of how connected or disconnected you feel about the world, and particularly other people. So how much do you care about this elderly lady? Would you help her carry her groceries to her home? Would you listen to her life story? Would you call her every day to make sure that she's doing okay? Oh, and did you know that altruistic narcissism is also a thing? This means that the opposite of narcissism can also be narcissistic. Altruism in itself is a curious phenomenon because what looks so selfless on the outside likely has some strings attached to it. And ironically, both the altruist and the narcissist can be driven by a need for validation. Okay, now before we get dizzy taking apart this concept, let's rewind the time all the way back to ancient Greece, to the origin of the term narcissism. It all started with Narcissus. Narcissus is described as a beautiful young man who once sees his reflection in the water, initially thinking is someone else. So he falls in love with that someone, and when he realizes that it's just a reflection of himself, and that his love will never be reciprocated, he melts away and turns into a golden white flower. So in a sense, he dies of unrequited love for his own reflection. There is a great tragic in this story. Humans are social creatures who need meaningful relationships in order to feel loved and validated, but when we get so focused on ourselves, we sabotage any meaningful relationships because those require empathy, time, and effort. Narcissus' desire for love is ultimately unattainable because he's focused on an illusion, which is his reflection. This is what narcissism is about in a nutshell. All that a stereotypical narcissist can see in other people is their own reflection. Of course, no genuine connection to others will be possible that way, and so the narcissist's actions will ultimately result in a great feeling of emptiness and possibly a very harsh awakening when they're older. The narcissist will wake up one day and realize that they don't know who they are because they have failed to connect to the outside world. And this is the more literal meaning of Narcissus melting away. But now let's zoom out a little bit before we accidentally overdramatize narcissism. Carl Jung would probably be chill about this topic. As opposed to Sigmund Freud and the general clinical psychology stance, he was not a big fan of pathologizing everything. Instead, he would propose that a narcissistic individual is in an imbalance or an underdevelopment of the so-called true self. This sounds so much better because it suggests that a narcissist is not a doomed human being who will stay empty forever, but that a development can happen potentially. The goal of any individual, according to Jung, is individuation, which relies on the gradual integrations of various aspects of the psyche to become a whole balanced person. Individuation basically means acknowledging and reconciling different elements within yourself, including the shadow, which contains the unconscious, repressed, darker parts of the personality. Narcissists tend to deny and repress their vulnerabilities, weaknesses, or negative traits, which are essential components of the shadow. Instead, they oftentimes project these negative traits onto other people. But denial and repression obviously don't work and will always backfire in one way or another. At the same time, this lack of integration leads to an inflated sense of self-importance and an inability to empathize with others. A narcissistic individual may be overly identified with their persona, the social face that they present to the world. The same can be true for the altruist, though. For the second part of the video, as promised, we're looking at what each MBTI type would be like as a narcissist. Let's also specify how likely narcissism would even be for each type and go from least to most likely narcissistic. If you know someone whom you suspect to be a narcissist, just ask them to take the MBTI test and then come back to this video and leave a comment, obviously. So before we start, let me point out the irony of this. You see, the MBTI is producing and perpetuating stereotypes by dividing all people into 16 types. And yet, by imagining 16 different types of narcissists, we are creating a more differentiated picture of this very vague phenomenon. Let's first look at how the general MBTI traits like introversion and extroversion correlate with narcissistic tendencies. Theoretically, any type could have narcissistic traits, although certain types may be more predisposed to such behavior. For example, extroverted types may seek external validation more readily, making them potentially more susceptible to narcissistic tendencies. Extroverted feeling types, such as ESFJ and ENFJ, may be more focused on needs and feelings of others, while extroverted thinking types, such as ESTJ and ENTJ, may prioritize achievement and success, which could lead to narcissistic behaviors if unchecked. Introverted types may exhibit narcissistic tendencies in a more subtle way, focusing on their internal fantasies of success or superiority. Introverted feeling types, such as ISFP and INFP, may develop narcissistic tendencies if they become overly self-absorbed or fixated on their own values and emotions. Introverted thinking types, such as ISTP and INTP, may exhibit narcissistic traits if they develop a sense of intellectual superiority over others. Both sensing and intuition preferences can manifest narcissistic tendencies, but in different ways. Sensing types may focus on tangible achievements and material possessions, striving to be the best in their field and accumulate wealth and status. Intuitive types may be more inclined towards intellectual superiority, believing themselves to be uniquely insightful or visionary. Both thinking and feeling preferences can contribute to narcissistic tendencies, although they may manifest differently. Thinking types will likely prioritize logic and efficiency, viewing themselves as the most rational and competent individuals. Feeling types may seek admiration and validations for their emotional sensitivity and ability to understand others. Both judging and perceiving preferences can play a role in narcissistic tendencies. Judging types may be more focused on achieving their goals and maintaining control over the environment, potentially leading to narcissistic behaviors if they prioritize their own success over the well-being of others. Perceiving types may exhibit narcissistic traits if they become overly self-indulgent or disregard social norms and responsibilities. Now, I came up with the following system to grade the likelihood of narcissism for each type. Please bear in mind, I'm not a psychologist, this is my personal speculation, and I'm creating this list purely for experimental fun. You can always let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with any of these points, especially when it comes to your own type. Let's start with the INFP, aka the least likely narcissist. Their strong sense of values should generally mitigate against narcissistic tendencies. They may sometimes experience internal struggles with self-worth and authenticity, so they can get this check mark, but I think that's not something that would make them narcissistic. Much rather, it could be a sense of moral superiority, which is where the grandiosity trait comes in. The INFP's thinking could go like, I'm so much more special and enlightened than everyone else, and they should all aspire to be like me. Furthermore, INFPs do feel social pressure and can sometimes internalize it, which may then result in pressure to live up to an idealized image of themselves, which in turn can lead to a sense of entitlement and a lack of empathy towards those who do not meet their standards. Out of all types, especially the INFP should watch out for idealizing themselves and others, and work on embracing their flaws and cultivate empathy for those unlucky people who may not meet their standards. The ISFP is probably too busy with their personal values and artistic expression to be a narcissist. Therefore, I see only low chance of them being a narcissist. If they are to ever show narcissistic traits, it's gonna be in times of self-doubt or identity issues. The ISFP may become self-absorbed in their artistic talents and seek validation for their unique expression. They'd think something like, I'm the most talented and creative person I know, and everyone should recognize and appreciate my unique gifts. ISFPs may become narcissistic as a result of feeling misunderstood or unappreciated, seeking validation for their unique talents and creativity as a way to validate their sense of self-worth and identity. ISFPs should watch out against becoming too self-absorbed in their artistic pursuits and seek validation internally rather than solely relying on external praise. The INTP's intellectual focus and independence may occasionally manifest as arrogance or dismissive attitudes towards others, which can increase their potential to have narcissistic traits. INTPs can become narcissistic as a way to compensate for feelings of inferiority or insecurity, using their intellect and logical reasoning to assert superiority over others and maintain a sense of control in their lives. Their thinking, in its extreme form, would be like, my intellect is far superior to everyone else's, and they should all feel honored to even be in my presence. Since they're also rather focused on ideas rather than emotions, they're effectively not offering much empathy from the start. So INTPs should keep an eye on their arrogance and actively take into account diverse viewpoints, as well as place more importance into emotional intelligence. I'm probably being a little too soft on the ENFP by placing them here. They oftentimes per default fulfill an important criterion of narcissism, which is the ability to manipulate others. ENFPs are generally good with people because they know what people want to hear. This can potentially make them dangerous. But thankfully, they're generally empathetic, and just like the INFP, they use introverted feeling, so authenticity is very important to them. Still, they might show a lack of empathy by prioritizing their own emotional experience over the impact that their actions have on other people. Plus, they sometimes want validation for whatever silly ideas they come up with, and may feel entitled to praise and recognition. It's a weird paradox, actually. On one hand, they seem to be so independent, and I know this because I am an ENFP myself. On the other hand, there must be a deep-seated fear of rejection somewhere, a big insecurity which the ENFP needs to mask with charisma. So they may have the attitude of, I'm the most fascinating person in the room and everyone should be grateful for the opportunity to know me. ENFPs should definitely watch out for excessive validation-seeking behaviors and focus on developing a more balanced sense of self-worth that is independent of external praise. The INFJ's insight and empathy typically steer them away from narcissistic behaviors, although they may experience inner conflicts or perfectionist tendencies. When they feel misunderstood or unappreciated, they may seek validation from others for how deep and insightful they are. The INFJ may develop a messiah complex, believing they are the only ones who can understand and save others. The narcissistic INFJ might be thinking like, I'm the only one who can see the truth and guide others to enlightenment. They should all worship me for my wisdom. So essentially, INFJs should watch out for developing a messiah complex and expecting others to conform to their ideals, because they might end up losing their empathy for people who oppose their views. ENTPs love ideas and debate, which can sometimes translate into a feeling of grandiosity. In a way, their narcissistic traits would be a combination of the ENFP and the INTP. On one hand, they'll crave validation for their originality. On the other hand, they'll want to assert their dominance and belittle others by using their wit and intelligence. ENTPs may sometimes feel inadequate, either because they feel like they're not meeting their own high standards or because they're not the best at expressing their emotions and connect to others on that level. So to deal with this inadequacy, they may try to overcompensate on the intellectual level. The logic of a narcissistic ENTP will probably be like, I'm always right, and anyone who disagrees with me is just too close-minded to understand my brilliance. Oh, and they can also be manipulative. Since they can twist any argument to their advantage, they're basically manipulating other people's perceptions and beliefs. ENTPs should always watch out for their tendency to dominate conversations and dismiss other perspectives, because life is not just about debating, and other people are not your opponents. Next up, we have the ISTP. They are rather pragmatic and independent, which in worst case scenario kind of goes hand in hand with a lack of empathy. I would also say that the emotional intimacy is rather not the hallmark strength of the ISTP, so because of that lack of emotional connection, they might be prone to have shallow relationships with other people. The ISTP can pride themselves in their practical skills, which may turn into a feeling of grandiosity. Just like the INTP, the ISTP has a weak feeling function, which might lead the ISTP to guard themselves against anything that has to do with emotional vulnerability. So as a defense mechanism, they turn into a detached and at the same time self-centered person. A narcissistic ISTP will think something like, I don't need anyone else, I can handle everything on my own because I'm the strongest and most capable person I know. So the bottom line is the ISTP needs to watch out for becoming too detached and self-centered, and they need to dedicate more time and focus to other people's emotions. The ENFJs typically want to help others, and it might make them focus on their self-importance. They will do things for people and will be expecting admiration in return. Plus, they'll feel like they're entitled to special treatment because of all the responsibility they take onto themselves. And they can be pretty manipulative, for example, by using their charm. They'll use it to gain compliance or to maintain a position of power. The narcissistic ENFJ will think something like, I'm the only one who truly understands what's best for everyone, and they should always listen to me if they want to succeed. Ultimately, the ENFJ has a tendency to suffer from a fear of abandonment, and they sometimes can be insecure about their worth and abilities. And they'll try to mask the insecurity with outward confidence and charisma. ENFJs should be cautious of using their charisma and empathy to manipulate others. The INTJ strategic thinking and vision may sometimes lead to a sense of superiority over other people, which can go hand in hand with the lack of empathy towards others, which is further substantiated by their general focus on logic and efficiency rather than emotional nuances. The INTJ may think something like, I'm the mastermind behind every successful plan and everyone who tries to challenge me will be defeated. All that strategy stuff that they do points to a general need for control and possibly a fear of vulnerability. So the INTJ may use their intellect and skills to assert a sense of power and dominance. Furthermore, their self-esteem is closely tied to their competence, so they might become defensive when faced with criticism, even if the criticism is constructive. In general, INTJs should be cautious of dismissing others' emotions and perspective, and they should know that competence and intellect are not enough. Emotional intelligence, for example, is one of those disciplines that would really make the INTJ shine and prevent them from developing narcissistic traits. This is possibly one of those altruistic narcissism cases. ISFJs may become super self-sacrificing and expect praise and validation for their acts of service. They may also develop a sense of moral superiority, and they might be having thoughts like, I'm the most caring and selfless person I know, and everyone should appreciate all the sacrifices I make for them. In general, caring about people is the opposite of narcissistic, so the ISFJ is still not extremely likely to become a narcissist, and yet they feel a pressure to meet the needs of others, which can eventually lead to resentment. This resentment can also be directed at people who appear to have an easier life than them. The ISFJ should remember that if you want to care about others, you should better not attach strings to it. If you do that, you're effectively manipulating other people. This type should also watch out for any resentment that's building up. Avoid giving too much to people who will likely not reciprocate it. Cultivate some boundaries, for example, by prioritizing self-care and assertiveness. The ESFP is considered to be outgoing and expressive, and they'll definitely have no problem with being the center of attention, generally speaking. These traits are precisely what can make them somewhat more prone to narcissism. The ESFP, in the more narcissistic version, will act on their natural talents and, for example, embellish their stories and exaggerate their accomplishment to make themselves appear more impressive. And in general, they will want attention, which they get through flashy behavior. Their thinking might go like, I deserve all the attention and admiration I get because I'm the most entertaining and charismatic person around. ESFPs can become narcissistic as a result of unresolved childhood trauma or neglect, seeking attention and admiration as a way to fill an emotional void and validate their sense of self-worth. I think they can also manipulate other people by fabricating drama, and since they can be social butterflies sometimes, they might be prone to have superficial relationships, because those offer them immediate gratification. ESFPs should rethink their relationship with the concept of attention and try to prioritize authentic connections over immediate gratification, as well as personal growth over external validation. ISTJs can become narcissistic as a result of a rigid and authoritarian upbringing. Because of this, they may adopt a controlling or domineering attitude in order to maintain a sense of order and stability in their lives. This will be especially visible in professional environments with a hierarchy. ISTJs may exhibit a rigid adherence to authority and how things have always been done, and as a consequence, they will treat alternative viewpoints as invalid. Their internal logic will go something like this. I'm the most reliable and trustworthy person around, and everyone should rely on me to get things done right. The ISTJ will prioritize logic over emotional considerations, and they will expect others to follow their lead without question. And while they are not typically manipulative, they may use their knowledge of rules and regulations to exercise control over others. A narcissistic ISTJ may be also resentful towards those who appear to have an easier life. ISTJs should watch out for becoming too controlling and dismissive of other people's perspective, and they should really work on having a slightly more open mind and adaptability in their approach to relationships and leadership. Achieving results is a key thing for the ENTJ. This aspect alone lets us check some of these boxes. This big drive for success and achievement can unfold in ways that will be detrimental to other people. At least I think that it's very likely to happen. If the ENTJ had a problematic childhood, for example, they've been neglected, they might feel worthless on the inside, so they'll get their sense of self-worth out of their accomplishments. It's basically their coping strategy. In the process, they will disregard other people's feelings, and they absolutely won't mind shallow relationship if they need them to get where they want to be. Their logic might go like this. I'm destined for greatness, and everyone who tries to stand in my way will regret it. Since they're so driven and competitive, they will have strong feelings about people who they perceive as more successful or powerful. And of course, manipulation is an important tool to get what you want, so the narcissistic version of an ENTJ will have no problem with using their skills to manipulate people. In order to keep their narcissism in check, the ENTJ would need to monitor their behavior regularly. Why don't you consider emotional intelligence and self-awareness to be the essential disciplines that you could take on as a challenge? Speaking of self-awareness, I think the ENTJ would really benefit from understanding the root of their drive for achievement. Why do you want to achieve all this? Be honest with yourself, like brutally honest. Achieving stuff at the expense of other people could backfire in the end. You might end up with many enemies, and who knows, maybe one of those enemies is an ENTJ themselves. Is that what you want? ESTPs are generally considered to be bold risk takers, and because they love action so much, there's only little room for any sort of consideration. So I think this type is kind of prone to develop narcissistic tendencies. Their love for the spotlight, along with the belief in their abilities, can inflate into an excessive sense of self-importance. ESTPs may exploit others for personal gain, using their charm and confidence to manipulate situations. They'll think stuff like, I'll do whatever it takes to get ahead, even if it means stepping on others to reach the top. On the inside, the ESTP is afraid of failure, and so they'll do everything to maintain a sense of power and dominance, and exploiting others is definitely an option here. The ESTP's relationships with others can be transactional and superficial, and the narcissistic ESTP will certainly pick relationships that will benefit them in some way. Since they are kinda competitive and driven to succeed, they might even become destructive. The ESTP needs to realize that chasing attention will leave them empty in the long run. Their extremely competitive nature also might make them forget that there might be a better use for their drive and ambition than just to outdo other people. In the context of narcissism, the ESFJ is basically like the ISFJ, but on steroids. So yeah, that's altruistic narcissism on steroids right here. The ESFJ needs to ask themselves why they need social approval so much, because this desire can ruin things for them. They'll argue like this: I'm the glue that holds everyone together, and they should all be grateful for my selfless dedication to their well-being. Again, like with the ISFJ, the ESFJ has a fair share of internalized societal expectations, which leads to a pressure to meet other people's needs at the expense of their own. This is a prerequisite for resentment, envy, and bitter vibes. And all this people-pleasing, unfortunately, has several not-so-pretty sides. The narcissistic ESFJ will be prone to guilt-tripping to get what they want, for example, which is highly manipulative. They might engage in passive-aggressive behavior or gossip to control social dynamics and maintain their position within the group. And when other people find out that you're gossiping, dear ESFJ, they might not like it. As an ENFP, this seemingly caring and supportive nature, together with the gossiping, is one of the biggest and most unforgivable hypocrisies to me. Because all your apparent kindness might be just a tool to get what you want. This goes against the law of kindness, and it makes you a dishonest person. The ESFJ type, in their narcissistic form, also checks several other boxes which all go back to their main goal, namely social acceptance. But by far the most central box here is the self-esteem one. If you rely so much on what other people think, you might dissolve in their opinions. Then there will be no more you, only them. Plus, nobody likes guilt-tripping. And if you're using all these tactics to be liked and accepted, then I guess we could say that your relationships are generally shallow. An ESFJ should set personal boundaries and avoid indulging in their people-pleasing too much. Try meditation maybe, or get a feeling of who you are. Understand that gossiping is not okay. And now I present you the type that's probably the most likely to become a narcissist, by my logic at least. The ESTJ has got what it takes to potentially become a narcissist, especially in professional settings and in leadership roles. This type, in its narcissistic form, might have been through such a rigid and authoritarian upbringing that they are now doing the same thing to other people. They will have this attitude of, I know what's best for everyone and they should all follow my lead if they want things to run smoothly. They are extremely focused on rules and structure, which can lead to a very rigid and authoritarian approach, which is a breeding ground for narcissistic tendencies. The narcissistic ESTJ will think that they're always right, that they deserve praise for their adherence to tradition, and they might even interpret other people's emotions as a sign of weakness. So they are also expecting special treatment because they've been climbing up the ladder so much that they're now above the law, paradoxically. I mean, above the very law that they were trying to uphold when controlling others. The ESTJ won't hesitate to manipulate you either by guilt tripping or even by intimidation, because they're using people to get where they need to get. Shallow relationships are absolutely okay for them. They might even surround themselves with people who admire and flatter them while neglecting any deeper connections. If they fail to achieve their goals, their self-esteem will immediately implode. And of course, they are extremely competitive, so there'll always be a problem with the people they perceive as more successful or powerful. Their envy might make them want to undermine their rivals. Now, the ESTJ probably won't listen to my advice here, but damn, how about you chill out for a second? Your ego can become your downfall. It's like a powerful engine without brakes. Sure, you'll get somewhere fast, but you'll likely crash and burn in the process. Think of your narcissism as a virus infecting your system. It undermines your effectiveness, alienates your allies, and ultimately sabotages your goals. Your leadership style is cool, but people follow more readily when they feel respected, not just ordered around. Recognizing their contributions builds loyalty and makes them more effective. Acting superior will isolate you from others, also manipulating people is exhausting and it doesn't guarantee results. So there's that. Generally speaking, no matter your type, in case of doubt, definitely seek a good therapist. Mental health is just as important as the physical health. Okay, so this has been a very long video, and if you're still there, I hereby officially congratulate you on your exceptional attention span. If you have any thoughts to share about anything I've mentioned in this video, please leave a comment. As usual, don't forget to subscribe if you like this video, because there are more on my channel. Have a beautiful day, take care, and bye-bye.